All your loots are belong to us. Presented by Sam Poe. Playing in the sandbox. If you play in the sandbox, there are bullies. If bullies go too far, they become criminals. Criminals commit crimes. So what's virtual theft? A good definition for virtual theft might be virtual theft, a verb, the unlawful transference of ownership or data from one party to another. So how do we get to theft in MMORPGs? More on that term in a minute. We'll need to go over a bit of history first. Before MMOs, there were single and multiplayer computer RPGs, like Blizzard's Diablo series or Square's Final Fantasy. And before those, there was the granddaddy of them all, D&D. Let's start there with the scenario. But first, some terms. The game or dungeon master, abbreviated GM or DM, is the person running the game. This term was transferred to customer support text when online RPGs came out. Your class is what type of character you're playing, be that a fighter, wizard, thief, etc. It's who you are. Race is the other half of your character type, giving permanent bonuses or penalties depending on the situation. It's what you are. A level up is when a character becomes experienced enough to increase in strength. How and when this happens varies by game design. Congratulations! You're a wizard. Actually, let's make that a thief. Roll your multi-sided dice. Move your mice. Wait a second. That's better. Kill some ROUSs with a dull stick of sharpness. Pickpocket that one still hiding in the corner. Pick the lock on the treasure chest that one of the mice magically dropped. Yes, something the size of your shoe is carrying a locked box the size of a man. I didn't make the rules. In all seriousness, though, D&D has passed over $1 billion in total sales over the years. Video games and RPGs both started around the same time, the late 80s. PC games, like Diablo, followed the tabletop formula of looting stuff you got from monsters and treasure chests, although there was no real thief class. Theft in early PC games generally amounted to conning someone or exploiting the game, although if you were fast enough you could probably steal something outright. That isn't really likely, though. Stealth games are a related genre, where you essentially act like a thief. Note, hiding under a cardboard box does not work in real life. Finally, there were MMORPGs, and people just kept stealing stuff. The late 90s began the MMORPG craze. That stands for Massively Multiplayer Online Role-Playing Game. That. To talk about MMOs, though, we need to talk about the loot system. In a party, when an item at or above the loot quality threshold drops from a chest or from a monster, players who are eligible are given 3 choices: need, greed, or pass. Need on something if you can use it, greed on something you might want or aren't sure if you need, and pass on anything you just don't care about or is just ridiculously low your character's level. However, there are problems with this system. Noobs, or new people, have a bit of a learning curve with it. Loot ninjas either impersonate a noob or outright roll need on something they shouldn't have. The binding system eliminates some of the rewards for theft by only allowing people to vendor items after they pick them up, or if you really want to be a jerk, destroy them outright. Although there are other binding classes such as bind to account. Of course, whenever there's a loot roll with an unfamiliar party member, everyone has to ask themselves, are they a noob or are they a ninja? Real world versus virtual world. Stealing is bad, most of the time. How do we combat virtual theft? Could we apply different real-world punishments? In ancient times, thieves were either killed outright, marked or branded, or even lost a limb for the act. These typically have some sort of parallel in the virtual world. The death penalty is one of the punishments. It's probably comparable to permanent banning. Branding would be another. That would probably be comparable to marking the player in the game so that the cops come after them, or defacing their avatar or UI in some fashion until either a certain amount of time has passed or they make reparation. The lex talionis, an eye for an eye rule, usually cut off a thief's fingers or hand. Yee. The comparison there would probably be locking a player out of an inventory slot or otherwise altering their UI functionality. I don't know if anyone's done that, but it's a novel idea. Modern penalties for theft usually amount to an imprisonment or amount of reparation, generally several times the initial value of the goods stolen. This is probably comparable to a temporary ban or penalty in in-game funds, once again multiplied by the original item's value. Some problems that face the community as a whole are that players have no real-world legal options. If you do something, you're generally under the judgment of the company, and companies usually render judgment almost like a god, and players are generally guilty until proven innocent under their systems. That usually only happens if you break the user agreement in some way, though. Another aspect is that these games are virtual, so any violations usually cross international borders with international laws, etc., etc. Like, you're in the US, the thief is in Sweden, suddenly you have to deal with all sorts of fun international stuff between the two countries. The ethics of theft can typically fall into three categories: egoist, utilitarian, and duty. Each of these has a different angle for both the thief and the target of theft. Under an egoist model, a target might have the mindset, you stole my stuff, while the thief is thinking, what's yours is mine. In a utilitarian model, you might broaden the issue from the person to the guild or faction. After all, it's reasonable to steal loot if it will hurt the enemy. For duty ethics, a target might complain that the thief broke the terms of service in some manner. Unless you're playing EVE Online. Anything goes there, as was probably mentioned by a previous group member. A duty reasoning thief, on the other hand, might act like Robin Hood, stealing from high-end players and giving to those with less. Although I've never actually seen that happen. The closest I've seen is when a player who left the game sold all their gear and donated the cash value to their guild, or even the first guy to walk by. Nice guy. To conclude, stealing is bad. The end. Actually, I have a couple more points. Theft is an ancient crime, with laws going back to Babylon and Egypt, but the consequences kind of need to be retooled for the modern era. Banning only goes so far, and in-game penalties are a nightmare to implement. These issues can't really be handed over to real-world courts either, since laws don't have the perspective to deal with digital rights yet. Although some countries, like the Netherlands, are actually prosecuting virtual thefts, but these occurred in the real world and were account theft, so they have real-world consequences. What do you suggest?